Hi, I'm Adam Forbes. I am the host of the Corporate Escapology podcast and the author of Corporate Escapology. Today, my guest is Niall Riddell. Niall has spent 10 or more years in corporate life in EDF and in SSE, but at heart, he's an entrepreneur. He was an entrepreneur all through his career by building various startups and side hustles, and now he's the founder of Paua, which is an EV, electric vehicle startup that provides fuel cards for electric vehicles for fleet solutions. And what I'm really interested in talking to Niall about is a few things. One is his journey from corporate life into becoming a startup founder, which is many people's dreams when they are sitting in a corporate job. But secondly, it's how he has got to know himself really well, to know the kind of founder that he wanted to become and the one he is being today. So he did lots and lots of leadership programs and work to try and understand himself when he was in a corporate job. And that thinking and that self-awareness, I think, is what's making him a really successful founder today. So let's meet Niall. Hi, Niall. Welcome to the Corporate Escapology podcast. Glad to have you here today.
Hello, Adam. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. Right. Well, I'm really keen. There's lots of things I want to talk to you about. You're a founder of a electric vehicle company, startup. We met when I was scouting for startups last year for the accelerator program I'm running. But you have a really interesting history. So let's start there. Tell us a bit about where did you start? Did you think I'm going to join a corporate? Did you think I'm going to join a startup? What were your original plans when you first started work?
I love this question because there's somehow an inference that everyone has a plan. I know it's great, isn't it? We get put through school years. We then choose some GCSEs and choose some A levels, and let's be quite frank, you probably choose them on the ones that are either easiest, most interesting, or you're best at. You get nudged a little bit towards picking a degree. You pick a degree, and you maybe choose where you go for that degree. And I did choose that. It was far enough away from home to be not home, but close enough to home to mean I could go home if I wanted to go home. So there's a little bit of engineering going on there, and then you end up in a career. And one assumes that the geniuses have laid out all of these steps that you're going to take and all these very clever strategic moves. And Steve Jobs said it best. You can only join up the dots when you look backwards. Mm-hmm. And therefore, what we're probably really going to talk about more is joining up dots looking backwards. So I failed to get a job. Well, that's not tricky too. I went traveling for a little bit, and then I failed to get a job. I couldn't get a job in my chosen industry. I trained as a chemical engineer, wanted to get a job in chemical engineering, and thought that the water industry would be a cool place to start. Couldn't get a job, so ended up accepting a job interview at a place called Dounreay. Dounreay, for those of you who don't know it, is on the north coast of Scotland. Some say the arse end of nowhere. It is a long way from anywhere. And it is a properly interesting place to begin your career because it gives you lots of time for reflection. My career started... It gets better. My career started on January the 4th, 2004. I arrived at the office in the dark. It didn't get light until 10:30. It got dark about 2:30. And I went back home to a rented property in the dark on the north coast of Scotland, where the nearest establishment was a pub. So that was the start of my career. It was fabulous. It gave me some incredible opportunity to be out in the wilderness, see some incredible parts of the world. But after 9 months, I was like, I can't do a second winter up here.
Okay.
So I moved down to Oxfordshire with the same company. So this was all through RWE Group.
Okay. Oh, you stayed. Okay, so you just transferred down, doing something, I guess, not that similar. If you
no, it was quite similar because what I was doing then was decommissioning nuclear power stations. And there's plenty of nuclear power stations that need quite a lot of decommissioning in this world today. So I moved from one role to another, started decommissioning slightly different nuclear power stations. It was all radioactive waste, cleaning up waste streams, and did that basically for about 3.5-4 years before and I should add, that was all through a grad program.
Okay.
It was a fairly light touch grad program, but it was a year long, gave me a load of training, opportunity, exposure to senior management, all the cool stuff that grad programs do. But after 3.5 years, I got offered the opportunity a boss of mine turned to me and said, hey, why don't you take this opportunity at British Energy? Now, British Energy operated the nuclear power stations, but the role was quite different. The role was now no longer in the sort of engineering side and more in the policy regulation space. Okay. So I joined British Energy in 2007. And in 2007, I walked into the office. I was very lucky. I had a very forward-thinking boss. He turned to me and he said, "Hey, Neil, why don't you go on secondment?" So a week in the office, he sent me off on secondment to a company or an organization called the Committee on Climate Change. So I joined the CCC in 2007 before it was a legally recognized entity. So we were sat in DEFRA at the time, and I had the privilege of writing the UK's first legally binding carbon budgets. So
Wow.
margin abatement cost curves, all the, solar is going to be too expensive. We'll never see it in the UK, through to, we should be building, a lot of CCS, et cetera, et cetera. That journey meant that I then returned 9 months later back to British Energy, but as a total carbon geek, it basically set the baseline for my career.
You just
and said,
reinvented yourself completely in just
exactly
months. Yeah, it's incredible, isn't it? And you're not the first person I've spoken to that has made these almost, I hate the word pivot, but you know what I mean, like big moves.
But you can, I can present it as a pivot, and I can also present it as like a tangential, very obvious thing to do. I've done an engineering degree. They taught me how to do maths and build simple models and, do calculations and be persistent at solving complex problems. When we went to the Committee on Climate Change, it was basically a set of giant equations. Each year for the next 30 years, how much might technology reduce based on learning curves to reduce the price, and therefore what's the marginal abatement cost for carbon that would drive us to a lower carbon economy? You set a target that you want to get to, you work out what the cost is, you set another target, you work out the cost, and you cost optimize a big model. That modeling process was basically what my career started on.
Really?
So I did modeling in my previous role. I then went back to British Energy, did more modeling. Then I went and modeled the future of the energy market. So it's basically giant math sets. And I then go and model something slightly different. This time I go and model the future of the energy market. What's the price going to be? How much gas? How much coal? And I basically got it horribly wrong. I missed the solar boom. So my modelling team, I was now at EDF, the French come along, bought British Energy. My modelling team was responsible for looking at how much of each technology would be built. I had 1 gigawatt in my forecast, and the UK built 11 gigawatts of solar. So all of a sudden I was standing there staring at a financial model and a process that a lot of people were involved in that I'd basically got wrong. Why? What had happened? And fundamentally, we'd missed a big shift in the market and in the move to distributed energy, the different financial and economic incentives. I suddenly realized that I was in a slightly different ecosystem, a different world. And this is, in many ways, probably where my attitude to working in a large corporate changed.
Right.
I presented several what I felt were relatively compelling arguments to say, listen, this solar thing is happening. The wind, you can see the wind technology and the speed it's taken off at. And by that stage, EDF did have some fledgling investments in wind. But the solar space was totally untouched and really not being looked at. And I put argument after argument after argument forward to the point where I was kind of going blue in the face and going, I'm really not getting anywhere here, am I? But because I'd missed that opportunity, I started volunteering. So I went and volunteered with a community energy company. And then this opportunity came up, which was a government-funded program for large corporates to support small businesses with their growth. And that was when I got the opportunity to go and start, working with this small solar enterprise called Repowering London.
Oh, so that was through EDF. It was still connected to it. It wasn't just something you just did.
It was technically
arm's length from it all. They'd let you go and join it, but they wouldn't give you any time off for it.
Well, no, this is where it becomes fun, because technically it was designed for senior management, and I wasn't senior enough. I was never senior enough. I wasn't senior enough to get into that bracket, but they had a space, so I volunteered, and they said, "Well, Neil, we've got a space, we'll let you in." So I went in on this program, went and spent several sessions with Repowering London. And it was quite a formalized structured process. We can't do the work for you. We can just give you advice and guidance. You tell us what your plans are, and we'll give you a bit of a feedback type thing. And it felt really dry and alien. And on the other side of the table, you had perhaps one of the world's most charismatic entrepreneurs, a gentleman called Agamemnon Otero, who has got his own little history to him. But he persuaded me after a couple of these conversations that I personally probably wasn't going to get as much out of this as if I went and actually became a non-exec. So I took on a non-exec role at Repowering London, on a
Oh,
voluntary basis for about several years, where I was basically supporting them with some of the stuff that I couldn't really do in my big corporate enterprise role. And it gave me visibility of a very early stage startup trying to
mm,
solve problems, social enterprise. So, even different challenges to a VC backed startup. But it gave me exposure to the challenges they were doing, the problems they were solving, the way they went about it, and some of the mentality that was basically fundamentally different to the way a large corporate worked.
interesting. Yeah, and without leaving the corporate to do that either. So you were kind of learning at the expense. I mean, you were learning at your own expense too, because it was all coming in your free time, but you weren't taking a financial risk at that time of
No,
jumping into something really unknown. Let's talk about what you did next then. So how long did you stay at EDF in total? And you were moving into EV during that time as well.
yeah. So I was with British Energy in 2007. They got bought in 2009. I ultimately left EDF in 2019. So I did 11 years
Oh,
inside
okay.
EDF. I did a number of roles. My career, at some point, I realized it was kind of going sideways
Mm,
because I basically have a really bad case of shiny object syndrome. I like the shiny stuff. I want to chase
mm,
after it. And, I'll go quite deep into detail on that shiny object or that topic and then come back out and go, oh, there's the next shiny thing. And off I go again. So I went from that modeling team where I was doing sort of long-term energy forecast modeling. A recruiter, I was like, oh, I want to go into finance. M&A sounds like fun. A recruiter turned to me and said, Neil, you can't do that. There's no way you can switch from your strategy role to a finance role. And I was like, okay, cool. So I went and did it. Persuaded my finance director at the time that it'd be quite cool. I'd done a brand sales project for him. So he brought me over through that into the M&A team, and then from that M&A role got very involved in looking at putting a lot of capital to work inside a charge point network. So that was what at the time Genie Point or Charge Point
yeah,
Services.
yeah.
We didn't make that investment because the risk profile wasn't right. But from there, went on to run the electric vehicle team at EDF. And then where the idea for my own business came from was ultimately from trying to launch a B2C proposition. And in that B2C proposition, which we did successfully launch, we had a smart home energy tariff. So remember, this is 2017, 2018, before these
Mm.
things were really on the
Kind of, yeah,
market.
really early, all of
Yeah.
this.
So we had a smart home energy tariff. We had a leased car from Drive Electric, and initially we had a charge point relationship with EO charging.
Uh-huh.
That EO charging one latterly changed to Pod Point, and we'll talk about that in a minute.
Yeah.
But
Uh-huh.
effectively, a colleague of mine was really keen on this idea that a driver should be able to leave their house, drive down the road, find a charger, plug in, put all the costs and data from that energy back onto their home energy bill. So we sat and we looked at this and we looked at ways that we could enable it and what it might require, etc. And ultimately, we discovered that there were two big things missing in this ecosystem to enable that to happen. The first one was a big aggregated network, because there's no point doing it with one network. You needed either a really, really big network or lots of aggregated networks. And you needed a technology player, because that process of integrating and managing all those networks and taking all that data and that cost and putting it back onto the utility's energy bill was a bit of a nightmare. So as a consequence of that, we didn't proceed. But it
Mm-hmm.
did leave me with this idea that someone needed to
Yeah,
build
you did
a big
proceed.
aggregated network and a technology.
Yeah, great. I mean, I love that. I love that. Yeah, your corporate's not going to do it, so I'll go and do it. But you
Well,
see
you
that, don't
say
you?
when you say it like that, it sounds so damned obvious, but it wasn't
Mm,
like that. It was like,
mm,
oh, that's an interesting idea. Someone should do that. Someone should matchmake
mm,
that. And I sat and I looked at that for, I don't know, 2.5 years, 3 years before I went, no one's doing it. Why is
mm.
no one doing it?
But
And
why did it take you that long? Because you've said to me before you were one of those guys that keeps the book of all the
oh yeah,
ideas, so presumably it was in that book. But here's the book.
yeah, I got
But
hundreds
why
of
was
these
it?
books.
Why did it never bubble up to the top enough to make you think I'm going to invest some time in this myself? Then.
Um, I don't know. That's a really interesting question. Um, I think a combination of things. Ideas are cheap. Execution is hard. Um, you know, the idea itself was fairly common. A lot of people had said it and spoken to me about it. And therefore,
Mm,
my assumption was someone was doing it.
yeah.
And over time, as I realized that no one was really driving that story
Okay.
forward, I just felt like actually maybe I should dig a bit deeper into why no one's driving it forward. So I sat down with my now business partner, Andre, and said, hey, Andre, Andre and I were on that Repowering London board together. So we'd
Right.
known each
Okay.
other 6 or 7 years at the time. And we sat down together and went, listen, why is this not happening? And I said, I think it's a real technical challenge. Now, Andre's background is building energy management, big data, IoT, energy meets tech. So he said, well, Neil, the problem is it's all commercial. No one can get the commercial relationships. And I was like, okay, well, I don't think so. I think the problem is all technical. I think, no one can do the integrations to make it work. And we went, ooh, hang on, there's something going on here, isn't there? At which stage I said, well, if I can get you the commercial contracts, can you integrate with them? And he said yes, and I said yes, and therefore, happily ever after kind of thing. But it was
Yeah. Okay.
that
Well,
moment
before we
when
jump to the happily ever after,
I'm not quite there
what?
yet.
Okay, which may be some time off. What? How did it work leaving? And did you leave and build on or did you keep building on the side, or how did you make that work to just get to where you are now as a founder of
Yeah,
Paua?
no, that's a really great statement. So Andre, at the time I spoke to him and said, hey, this is a problem I'm trying to solve. He basically came back to me and said, listen, I'm trying to build a business, but it's not really working. One of the things personally I knew deep down is I would never be able to be a solo entrepreneur. And I
Mm,
always knew I needed someone to work with who was like-minded, committed, passionate, interested in it. And his response to that question and knowing who he was meant I had a lot of confidence that between us we could do something really interesting. So that
mm,
moment was like, yeah, okay, so now I know someone who can help me do this.
mm,
There's like a million things that then happen next, but one of the million things was obviously you have to have that conversation with your family.
mm,
And that conversation with my family took quite a long time
mm.
because what basically happened was in 2019, I had an offer to take redundancy from EDF.
Okay.
The way that EDF had been managing its innovation function meant that a lot of people went into that innovation function, and corporate innovation is a whole topic in its own right. But many people went in there because they were heading out of a career, they were, leaving the business. It wasn't generally seen as a career path. And
Hmm.
therefore, when I went in, I had to sign some paperwork to say, Neil, you might be given the offer, the option to leave in a
Oh,
year's time.
interesting.
Yeah, it
Oh,
was a
that's
bit
kind of
weird.
well known that was a route out. Yeah.
And
Okay.
it
Interesting.
became a route out, which was actually, there's quite a lot of people in a similar space in that team. It became a route out, which actually became quite attractive because I was sat there
Mm,
going, do I want to do this?
mm.
Where am I going to go? So I left EDF in the summer of 2019. I had committed to taking a job with SSE, another energy company.
Oh, yeah.
So I went
Mm.
to SSE in late 2019 with this half-baked idea in my head that there was something in here that was worth exploring. And
With
Andre and I,
SSE, you thought with SSE you'd do it, or you
no,
thought
no,
with
no, no. I thought I'd do it
yeah,
myself, but I was
yeah.
like, I'm not far enough down the journey, with funding and opportunities, blah blah blah, to make it work. So I'll take the opportunity with SSE that had been presented to me because I was making these decisions in parallel. I took the opportunity with SSE, joined SSE, and basically COVID struck in early 2020.
Ah, yeah.
So I was writing a pitch deck, taking it out to investors in March 2020 as COVID struck, whilst also having a
Yeah.
day job at SSE. And it became increasingly obvious that COVID meant that no one was doing anything pragmatic or fast. So kept my corporate job, as did Andre. Andre was doing a whole bunch of consulting at the time. We both kept our jobs, whilst also working out how we're going to build this business. Now, one of the things COVID did was it triggered government to release a number of pots of funding for innovation.
Mm. Hmm.
And we won one of those pots of funding.
Oh, wow.
So
Okay.
so we kind of were fortuitously in this place whereby COVID had shot us in the foot and then,
Mm.
handed us the silver lining from the cloud immediately afterwards. So it was that time, wasn't it?
Yeah.
So we got this
And you were
opportunity
also
to.
kind of at home working, so no one was really that clear what you were doing, I guess.
So this gave us the opportunity to do a 7.5 hour working day, the conventional corporate working day. There's no commuting time now. That's an
Yeah.
hour either side I
Yeah.
was saving. So
Yeah.
that's 2 hours. Then
Yeah.
evenings. I've got kids, but after they go to sleep, there's an evening right there.
Yeah.
So that time that I had established how to use during my MBA became available to me. So I used it. Um, Made all the applications, built pitch deck, started reaching out to my network of contacts who I'd built previously. And because we were successful with that Innovate UK bid, Andre and I were both able to go full time on building Paua in April 21, having
Okay.
secured the Innovate bid, a small amount of friends and family money, which was
Yeah.
effectively a check to cross match the Innovate UK expenditure,
Uh-huh.
and a T-Trig, a triggers support from the Department of Transport.
So
Yeah,
yeah, so
spot
tell
on.
us about Power then. So how has that evolved since April 2021 when you were
Jumped in.
starting your?
So we won this Innovate UK project, which was to build the backbone of basically what we're doing, which is effectively aggregating charge point networks into a solution that enables business drivers to access and use public charging. So what we did with that project was we aggregated our first networks, built our first backends, built our first solution, brought on board our first customers. And it was a perfect way to enter the world of building a business because you've been government funded and you can actually build the proof case that you need to be able to then start thinking about more serious fundraising.
But it's a fuel card. That's how you. That's how people are. Yeah, tell about how does it work? So the back end is all that integration, but from the
Yeah.
front end,
So effectively, what we're doing is we're aggregating multiple charging networks together and giving the drivers a single tool, which is either a mobile app start, so they can press a button to start it, or they can tap the RFID card on the reader, and that enables the charging session to run. This is effectively a digital token. So, it gets recognized on the back end systems of the charge point
mm,
operator, and we then get invoiced for all the bills. So our job is a bit like Concur. We aggregate all the bills across all of the charge points and provide a layer of insight to the charge point operators and to the fleet managers about what's going on inside their
mm.
business. So we're now up to a team of about 10.
Are you okay?
We've raised a couple of rounds of funding, which is very cool. We've got some nice, friendly investors who help shape and guide, the journey we're on. We're in a relatively competitive space.
Mm-hmm.
We bump heads with people like Allstar, who's the mega fuel card provider for your petrol and diesel vehicles.
Ah, yeah.
We bump into BP and Shell quite regularly, both of
Mm-hmm.
whom are active in both the liquid and the electric ecosystem.
Mm-hmm.
And then obviously within that, there's other startups that are building different parts of this ecosystem and solving different problems.
Mm.
One of the things that I was very lucky to get early on in my journey, I got introduced to another founder. His name was Phil Nunn. Phil was a second-time founder, and he was partway through starting an electric vehicle charging startup. And the idea of his startup is it helps businesses with the rollout of chargers into their customers' homes. But Phil was quite a forward-thinking and collaborative chap, and he joined me into a group of fellow like-minded EV startups. And all of a sudden, there was like a little ecosystem whereby I could take my big corporate experience and try and learn how to think like a startup.
Mm.
And the thing that I most obviously noticed as you step outside of the world of large corporate with your well-recognized brand, your regular paycheck, your comfy desk, and very organized routine, was you're now standing naked in front of a crowd of millions of people with the clothes on your back, a piece of paper, maybe a laptop if you remember to buy one before you left, and your idea. That's it. Good luck. On your marks, get set, go.
And how did that community of maybe founders that had only been founders and never worked in corporates before, how did they react to you?
It was quite an interesting ecosystem because I'd become quite passionate about the world of understanding what startups had to do and the challenges they faced before leaving big corporate. So one of the startups in that group was Nick Woolley from EV.Energy. Nick and I had a quite an extensive engagement when I'd been at EDF. He
Okay.
latterly went on and did a lot of work with EDF. So I'd seen Nick's journey from the other side, from the corporate side. And it was super useful for me to think about reversing that role as I was now speaking to corporates. Likewise, Luke and Ollie from Elmo were in that group, and they've been good enough to invite me to be one of their advisors early on. So I'd
When
had
you
the
were an
experience
EDF.
when I was on EDF's side,
Yeah,
and I'd had
okay.
that experience of supporting two guys like taking on the
Mm.
world, surrounded by large corporates. So in many ways, it kind of given me that, uh, vicarious, I think is the word I'm looking
Yeah,
for,
yeah,
opportunity to see how an entrepreneur or an early stage
yeah.
business is, tackling challenges. And it was,
But it's
yeah,
interesting too, isn't it? How you had given. your time, your expertise. You'd helped first, and therefore there was a bit of reciprocation needed when you were like them again now,
But
and so this whole thing of that network is so vital that you don't screw it
100%.
over. And I see plenty of that. I mean,
Oh
I'm
yeah,
interesting. I see it now just as much as I did when I was at BP. That people can let the power of being in a corporate go to their head a little when they're dealing
hugely.
with a company that clearly needs the business from that corporate, and you may find yourself in a different position later on when you might regret having behaved like that.
It's I almost argue that the post EDF community is stronger than the inside EDF community.
Mm,
And the network of people that I work with now inside, who've been ex EDF employees, or ex SSE employees, and it creates this like common. There's a little bit of common glue. Yeah, we both worked at a big
mm,
corporate. I'm now in a
mm.
mid-sized company, small size, whatever it is, was really powerful.
One thing, one of the things I think about with you is this self-awareness is strong with you. It's like it was quite deliberately cultivated self-awareness.
Yeah. I mean, the biggest advantage I had of working inside a large corporate was the number of times they sent me on leadership training. So I've been an owl, I've been red, I've been an ENTJ, I've been, all over the place. But a couple that really stood out to me were Edgar Schein's career anchors test. Something
Mm,
I get a lot of people to do, and just go and Google it. Schien, Edgar Schein, and he's got this career anchors test. And the career anchors are these things that are fundamental building blocks in your career. And I think there's three that they're recognized. And the one that I really felt was like just a really good example of me was pure challenge. And basically the idea was that I will go for any job opportunity that is just pure hard work and grit. And when I looked at that, I went, actually, that sounds much like starting a business, which I'm really
mm,
scared of, because having done
mm,
an MBA, I learned what all the things are that go wrong with businesses. So I spent a lot of time trying to get closer and closer to the world of small businesses as part of that exploration journey. Um, but I did all these tests, I did all this learning, I got a lot of internal feedback. We used to run a formalized and an informalized process every year of 360 feedback. That 360 feedback is massively overused, but it's basically the way I always used to tackle it was, what have I done well this year? And I'd ask other people, what have I done well this year? What could I improve on? What should I do more of? What should I do less of? And what should I stop? I'm pretty terrible at some things, and that's actually a really, really strong strength to have. If you know what you're bad at, that's
yeah.
you're on an absolute winning streak. If you
Mm,
also know what you're good at and really enjoy, now you're really on the front foot. And then obviously there's the stuff you just never know. And having done the MBA, I was like, listen, the only way I'm going to know what it's like to run a business is to go and dive foot first in, and build and run a business from the start. And therefore, the thing that I just didn't know about myself was, would I be able to run a business? And to be quite
mm.
frank, I still don't know. And there's going to be several years of trying to find out. But this is all a journey of self-discovery. And it's also pushing the limits, working out what's achievable, what's not achievable, what's a good idea, what a bad idea. And feedback comes into that hugely, but also, constantly reevaluating yourself. I learned what kind of thinker I am. I learned what kind of learner I am. And therefore, I know that if you give me a picture, it'll help me speed up my learning journey a lot more than giving me a big chunk of text.
But when you just said before about didn't know whether you were going to be good at running a business, don't you think maybe that might be a bit of humility there, because you'd seen it when you were doing the community solar business. You'd seen it various times in EDF when you'd been preparing business cases, or you've been watching how things delivered as expected. There were a number of things that would have given you confidence that you could run a business. You knew
Yeah,
enough about your drive and your
yeah.
focus and discipline that you knew you weren't going to kind of like sit on your backside 3 days a week and then be disappointed that nothing happened that week.
No. The complete opposite. I was like, let's do more and see what more happens.
Mm.
All the things I've learned for the last 2.5, 3 years, things I'm going to have to relearn when the business is bigger and, got twice as
Yeah.
many people and twice as much revenue and got
Yeah.
different, tax liabilities and international expansion questions. And, the fabulous thing that I think I have learned is that everything will be different. There are no rule books, there are no guidelines, and therefore you just got to keep going, stay in the game, manage all of the basic obvious stuff that you've been taught about, like cash flow and liabilities, and make sure that you've got a business model that actually makes sense, and then create value for customers.
And so how much would you say you use today from your corporate experience, and how much have you had to unlearn to be a founder?
So the fundamental makeup of who I am today has been hugely dominated by spending 15 years in large corporates. And I've only really been outside the world of large corporates for about 2.5, 3 years. So as a consequence, my bedrock core skills and capabilities are all corporate. The biggest thing I've had to unlearn is risk. The attitude to risk of a nuclear power plant operator is fun.
Gotcha.
I know, it's fundamentally different to that of an entrepreneur.
Mm,
So I'm sat here
thankfully,
going,
thankfully.
can I get away with this or not? And if I was in a nuclear power station, like, what does it say in the rule book? Whereas that rule book doesn't exist. So, that the risk attitude and the risk appetite has changed. I think the thing that I actually feel my integrity won't let me let go is the way that I present who we are as a business and what our capabilities are. I find it really uncomfortable to sit in front of a customer and say, yeah, we can do that. Because if we can't do it, I'm not going to say that because it's
Yeah,
wrong.
yeah.
I guess one of the things that Andre and I have both found relatively hard, because Andre's got some, large corporate background as well, is that ability to kind of overstate our position.
Yeah.
So when we tell people we've got access to the UK's largest roaming network, we do have access to the UK's largest roaming network. It's not made up. It's not happening tomorrow. It's not happening yesterday. It's not coming in 6 months' time. It's here now. I had a couple of VC investors who I really love who didn't invest. And they didn't invest because my story wasn't big enough. I wasn't,
Mm,
super confident. And
mm,
in their words, I wasn't cocky enough about what we
yeah,
were doing. So they took
yeah.
me aside and they coached me on the kind of behavior and language that I should be using when pitching to these Series A investors. And it was quite insightful for me because it highlighted that risk averse, pragmatic, engineering driven nature that I'd spent 15 years cultivating inside large, safe corporate utilities was to some extent hampering me. So
Mm.
that was a behavior set that I think I still probably need to overcome.
Although lots of corporate people dream of becoming founders, I do think it is a hard leap for corporate because principally because of the risk, principally because we want to have everything kind of mapped out, principally because we're overthinking things because that's what we're taught to do to be successful. And a founder needs to be more instinctive and follow follow the market, take more risk, all of those sorts of things. But I do think there is a type of founder that has that corporate background, and I think you are it. That is taking all the best bits of the corporate training and the sort of immersion in corporate life and building a business off the back of that and learning quickly where some of these things are hampering them and trying to adapt and evolve, but without offloading it all, because actually a lot of it is really valuable and it's valued by others.
Yeah, no, I think that's quite true, and I'm not sure that I'm alone, and therefore when I spend quite a lot of time listening to podcasts, not surprisingly, so I quite often listen out for the founder who has come from a larger corporate background because they tend to have a different angle on things. Quite often, they're
Mm,
finance. I've noticed lawyers and financiers tend to end up going to
mm,
the world of building businesses. But yeah, it's quite interesting to listen to their perspectives and try and work out the challenges they faced at different stages in their journey, and therefore what I might want to consider as we go on our
mm.
journey.
Cool. Well, I just want to. I thought it'd be good just to end up with like, what would you do differently now? So imagine you're back there 3 years ago, back in SSE or even EDF, really, and just like, and you now know what it's like to be a founder of a sort of low carbon business, net zero business. It's an area that has been to a degree shielded a bit from some of the worst parts of financial crisis because people recognise it needs investment. What would you tell yourself then that you know now?
I don't think I'd change a lot.
Mm.
I think for me and my character and my personality, it's actually the timings of everything has worked out quite well. It's been a good point in my career to step away from large corporates and build something myself. The
Mm.
market trends were right, my skill set was right, my attitude was right. My personal circumstances were not right; they're never right. But the one thing that I think there's probably a bunch of things, but the one thing that I really think I would change would be maybe the way I responded to other people. Um, through these assessment processes you do in large corporates, I had several people tell me things which I look back and maybe they give me fire in the belly, but I had several people tell me things like, Neil, you're not entrepreneurial enough. Neil,
Mm.
you're not innovative enough.
Oh.
Neil, you can't do that.
Mm.
No one can tell you what you can and can't do. No one can judge the limits of your capability. And yes, the intention of these feedback sessions is to try and, explore where your strengths lie. But if you spend too much time listening to people who maybe themselves haven't had that full set of experience, you risk hampering your own mental ability to consider what you could do. If you really are trying to find out about yourself, don't rely on one person's opinion.
Mm.
Speak to everyone because everyone's got a different perspective.
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? Because because it's so hierarchical in a corporate, if somebody quite senior gives you feedback, you do give disproportionate
Yeah,
attention to that feedback. I
and
mean,
it's
isn't it hilarious to be told by somebody in a corporate you're not entrepreneurial enough, as if
I
they
know
would really even know what that meant,
exactly.
or even innovative enough. I
I
mean,
know.
it's just, but yeah, of course. I mean, I've probably had the same experience too, where I've given undue attention to somebody's feedback. And not got enough data points to validate whether that feedback was true or not.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, so great. That's a great bit of feedback. Well, hopefully, people listening to that will.
I guess the other thing that we touched on earlier that's probably quite important is I was always kind of looking for the right time. And for me, the right time actually came when I realized there wasn't a right time, because there isn't a right time.
Mm.
I started this business basically shortly before my second child was born. So, two kids in the house. The third child was born, year and a half into the business, 2 years into the business. And quite quickly you go, well, actually, there's going to be people all around you who are going to be impacted by your decision, and you've got to get them comfortable with your decision and why you're doing it. And one of the things that got me most comfortable was I had a conversation with a guy called Roger Atkins. Roger Atkins is quite an outspoken voice in the world of e-mobility, and he told me half a dozen stories about things he'd done in his career. He'd been involved with Richard Branson and launched brands and all sorts of stuff, and he had some great stories. And I was sat there going, I really want some of those great stories. And I was like, well, on my deathbed, if I look back and go, if I'd not done this, would this be a good thing or a bad thing? And I just came to the conclusion that it was a good point in my career to go and have a shot at something. And if I completely screw it up, I can go back to the world of big corporates,
Yeah.
lessons learned, insights given, new experience. Now here I am, EDF, SSE, British Gas, back on your doorstep wanting a job. And it might
It's
have put
low
my career
risk,
back.
really, isn't it?
It's low
It's low
risk, really.
risk, really, because
Exactly.
you can go back to that always, where you
Yeah.
may not always give yourself an opportunity and permission to go and do something
Yeah.
like this. Well, brilliant. I really enjoyed that. That's a really great place to end. So thanks a lot, Neil. That's brilliant. I hope you've given inspiration to people who want to do this, but there's a big reality check that I
Oh,
think
100%.
you're caveating all of this with too. And this whole piece around self-knowledge, self-awareness, I think is really the thing I take away from this call, and I hope others will too. That invest in understanding yourself, both that sort of 360 view of like what you're good at, less good at, but also just understand yourself before you jumping into something that's really, really different from what you currently do, to make sure that you've de-risked where you can, or at least you're not going in blind or naive or with a sort of dream really backing it up rather than a sort of hard reality.
Yeah, 100%. Stay learning. That's the aim of the game ultimately.
Brilliant. Thanks so much. Cheers.